Desmond Doherty, welcome to the Silk Festival here in Norway.
Well, thank you very much. My great pleasure to be here.
That's good, that's good. You're enjoying the festival so far?
It's fantastic. I mean, the hospitality is second to none. It's my first time here in Norway, and I've been very warmly received as an Irishman abroad.
That's good to hear. That makes two of us then. I want to ask you then about your novels, particularly the first one, Valberg. Here we have a rather, let's say, he's unconventional in Northern Ireland terms.
Yes. Yes, well, he's very unconventional because as a practicing lawyer, I had to make a decision when I made the decision to write the book. I had a flip-flop in terms of writing the book in terms of the point of view of a character, and it would have been easy for me to write a novel about a struggling lawyer down on his luck and winning a big case, but to write it from the point of view of a police officer, particularly in the times that we're in now in the north of Ireland with the change from the RUC to the PSNI, was a challenge in itself. So I went out of my way to make him unconventional because if he was conventional, then he wouldn't be of any interest to anyone.
Well, I mean, you have, first of all, someone who's like an interloper. He's of Swedish ancestry, and he drives a Saab and he likes buying an Olufsen. Yes. It's almost like he's just come from Sweden to mess with them almost.
Well, it's that situation whereby, and we've all had it, where somebody was in your school, in your class, and they had a peculiar surname. And it wasn't like if you're from Donegal or from Derry, and it was either Doherty or McLaughlin. It was somebody with a very peculiar surname, and you always wondered if there was a bit of mystery or whatever about them. And that's what I was thinking on when I created Valberg, because the literal interpretation of Valberg is iced mountain. That's what his name means, and I think it suits the character. And it was trying to make somebody who was different, and of course, we've all had the occasion to back home in Ireland where somebody has a parent who is from another country, and in Valberg's situation, his father Gustav is from Sweden. So there's a big Scandinavian influence, but of course, that was the influence for me as a writer, because I have been highly influenced by the Scandinavian writers. So I wasn't going to shy away from it.
Okay, but then he's pitted against this old system, the stalwarts of the RUC, if you can say, particularly this guy called, I think it's Montgomery. And there you're up against everything that was entrenched. And he's like, Valberg is like a catalyst for change in this society.
Yes, well, he I suppose, in a way, represents the change that is taking place now between... Remember, we had the B specials. Then, of course, then you have the RUC, and now it's the PSNI, as they're known. And I suppose that the people like Montgomery, and there's Dickey, and then the chief constable, Carlin, in fact, represent the past, the old RUC. Valberg potentially represents the present, or we'd like to think him representing the present. And then there's some younger police officers, Constable Bell, for example, may represent the future. So I try to get the difference between the three different types of people within the book, and who would exist within the police force as well. But I'm sure that's something that is common to police forces all over the world.
But he's also a thinking policeman. He's got a penchant for Seamus Heaney. That comes out in the book. Right?
Well, it has to, but that comes from his father. Because one of the things that happened in the book at his father, without giving any plot spoilers away, was a jury member. But in the case that he was involved in, he spent most of his time reading Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney, and the judge noticed that he had it in his hand every time that he walked into the jury seat. But the judge allowed it, because judges would be quite particular about what people are reading. They're only allowed the notebook in terms of the case that they're dealing with, to take some notes. But he had the Death of a Naturalist, and that was his notebook. And in all around the Death of a Naturalist, one of the original copies from 1966, he had drawn sketches and written notes about the case. And the love of Heaney within the family, particularly from Valberg's father, it just passed down, and Valberg inherited it.
Okay, because if you read Heaney, you will find there are some references to Sweden and Scandinavia.
Yeah, well, I mean that's something that Gustav Valberg, John Valberg's father, brought with him. And John Valberg, the policeman, would have grown up with that in his home as a child. So the influence is there. The Nordic and the Scandinavian influence is heavy in Heaney's work, and it's something obviously that I absolutely love.
Okay. Okay, but if I can progress then to the next novel, Sins of the Father, you have the same character. You also have there's the person who's like doing the bad deeds here is following into this novel also.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, Sins of the Fathers is a progression from the first book, and what I've tried to do is not keep the character static. What I set out to do when I was planning these first three novels is make the characters progress. So I didn't want to write another novel on the same character in the same location, but with a new story. I wanted to progress it, and I wanted to progress the characters. So in the opening scene of the first book, Valberg's mother passes away in very tragic circumstances. And then that all leads on to the book, the story developing, and at one stage the main protagonist, as he's seen in the book, as you believe it when you're reading it, Mr. Gerard O'Driscoll, comes more to the fore, and he's introduced more to the book, and you find out more about him, and you find out more about his background, you find out more about the type of operations and missions that he'd been on, and you find out who he was working for and who trained him, because a lot of this goes back to what was happening in the north in the 70s and the 80s to the Force Research Unit. And as we know from the first novel, that O'Driscoll was effectively hand-picked, and he was taken from prison, and he was effectively a trained killer.
But it also reflects a little bit what's been going on in Northern Ireland in recent years in terms of the past not really disappearing or going away. And there's a lot of people that are actually looking for justice still.
Yes, well, that's something that's talked about quite a bit, because if you remember, one of the main themes of the Bloody Sunday inquiry was the search for truth and justice, and that those two words, stuck with people. But I would always say that when I'm speaking about these matters, particularly to other lawyers, is that the definition of truth and the definition of justice, it may mean something completely different to yourself than it means to me, and it's everyone's interpretation of it. But it's a common goal, and I think in the last number of years, particularly in Ireland, there has been an outpouring of issues about the past, because we've obviously seen it with the Catholic Church as well, and a whole other area. There's an outpouring of the search for the truth, and there's an outpouring for the search for justice. But that can mean different things to different people, because to put it quite bluntly and boldly, the character in the Valberg books, his search for truth and justice is done by revenge and retribution, which is totally unlawful, totally wrong, and you cannot agree with it on any basis at all. But you can take a step back, because I've met people who have talked to you about the books, and they have said to me that they have had empathy for Mr. O'Driscoll. And I suppose it's a very Irish thing and a very Derry thing, because I have met people and they have said to me, they use the phrase, he's some boy, isn't he? And when they say that, I don't know if they're talking about Valberg or they're talking about O'Driscoll. And a lot of times they are actually talking about O'Driscoll, because they may not agree with what he's done, but they can understand why he's done it. Yep.
But you could apply that term to both of them, actually, could you not?
Well, I think that's right. I think that's definitely right, because a lot of people have really taken Valberg himself to their hearts, and they really like the character, and they like the fact that everything goes wrong. Usually in the law, the perception in the media, and particularly from American courtroom dramas, is that it's all one way, and the perpetrators are bad and the police eventually win. But in the Valberg books, you can just see that everything within the law goes wrong. Nothing ever goes right, but you just have to struggle on, and perhaps that is the search for justice that allows that.
But he is a flawed character also.
Well, he has to be, because he's human. I mean, we're all flawed, every single one of us, and it's just that he wears his heart on his sleeve. I mean, he has a number of course, of medical conditions that are in the book, and one of them being one of the most important ones, I think, for me, is the fact that he suffers from sleep deprivation. And that's something a lot of people can relate to, particularly in this day and age, in the day of the internet and .com and Instagram, tweeting and Facebook. We're constantly on computers, we're constantly on the internet, and we're constantly doing things really quickly. He's the complete opposite of that. And he can't sleep. But then when he does sleep, it's a very deep sleep, and as a result of him not being able to sleep and having a sleep deprivation disorder, he hallucinates quite a bit. So he fantasizes things in his head. He thinks out situations, and sometimes he believes that they're actual reality, but they're not. But he's no threat to anyone. But that is the story told from his point of view. It's the craziness of his mind, and it becomes quite lucid. Because one of the reviews that I had read at one stage, somebody said that reading particularly the second book, reading the Valberg novels was like watching a movie as opposed to reading a book. Yeah. But I took that as a compliment.
Oh, okay, well, point taken. Well, can I then ask you you have a third novel coming soon? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the third novel in the Valberg series is called Deadlight, and the title comes from Operation Deadlight. Operation Deadlight, it was an operation at the end of the Second World War by the British Royal Navy to scuttle the German U-boats that were captured after the Second World War off the northwest coast of Ireland. Okay. And 42 of these U-boats, because they were dreaded, if you remember, in the Second World War, they were absolutely hated and they caused so much devastation. 42 of them were moored at Lissahallie in Derry. And there's famous footage of it, black and white footage from the Path News reports, and a lot of still photographs. And I was very fascinated by this because I thought, God, wouldn't it be great if those 42 German U-boats were still there? What a great museum they would be, because it would be great to see it. But they were there from April or May at the end of the war. And then it was decided they would take them out to the northwest, out to the Atlantic, to scuttle them. But of course, our weather being the thing that it is, in October when they took them out, the sea was swelling, the wind was howling, and there was a storm, and they couldn't get the U-boats out. So a lot of them then were scuttled at the mouth of the Foyle, and they were sunk there. And not only were they sunk, they had to actually blow them up, and they had to actually shoot them down, and there was footage of all this happening. But I thought that was a good metaphor for the past, and for truth being buried, and the fact that it was buried at the bottom of the ocean. It was a metaphor that was used, and also it was used as a code name for someone in the book.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty interesting. I wish you well with the third novel. Okay. Desmond Doherty, thanks for talking to us today.
Okay, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks.